Yes, gosh.
Answer them all.
I think there was a sense when we heard that Liz Truss was going to resign that it was a lovely pipe dream that Boris Johnson was going to kind of come back and be the salvation of the party. But nobody really thought that was going to happen, particularly when the 1922 executive then set the threshold at 100 MPs. And let's not forget that the reason that Boris Johnson isn't our Prime Minister is because there was a mass resignation of ministers from his administration. And that followed revelations that he had known about some claims of sexual misconduct against his Deputy Chief Whip, Chris Pincher, which is how the whole thing came tumbling down. So we start at the kind of Thursday point of, this possibly can't happen. And then by Thursday evening, we start hearing, yes, he's going to stand. And we're thinking, OK, great. Boris Johnson loves nothing more than being talked about. So perhaps this is just a kind of opportunity for him to kind of salvage his reputation as the great saviour of the party, be the kind of kingmaker in whatever comes next. And but no, surely he can't really stand. And then you start seeing the public declarations. And indeed, those have been pouring in now for several hours and days. We've just seen Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, take to Twitter this morning to say that she will also be backing the former Prime Minister, which makes you think they must know something that perhaps we don't, which is that he really does have a kind of view that he can come back and save the party and unite it.
The one that surprised me, and that was surprised is the right word, but Ben Wallace, for example. Ben Wallace, if he'd come out already saying he supports Boris Johnson, that makes him relatively hard for him to remain in his role if it turns out to be Rishi Sunak, does it not?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's absolutely right, and that's clearly something that's priced in. I mean, I think the thing that I'm watching very keenly is Boris Johnson going to like it if he's not first amongst MPs? At the moment, we can see that Rishi Sunak is the standout runaway favourite amongst MPs. It seems to have hit that 100 threshold. There's talk that he, amongst people that are kind of taking numbers privately behind the scenes, that he's around the 140 mark already, which is pretty outstanding in terms of that. And I just kind of wonder, given what we know about Boris Johnson and his ego, whether he's going to be satisfied with the notion of coming second amongst MPs and then suffering a sort of similar fate really to Liz Truss, who also came second amongst MPs with Rishi Sunak coming first, and then seeing a reverse of those fortunes when they went to the party. And of course that didn't go so well because it still leads to a very disunited party, and it does seem to be in kind of self-destruct mode at the moment.
Is it a given, do you think, that if it goes to the membership, Boris Johnson wins?
Yes.
It's absolutely a given, you think,
yes.
even now. Wow. Okay, what about these stories that senior people are working behind the scenes to broker some kind of deal between Johnson and Sunak to bury various hatchets, not this time in backs?
See, that makes sense to me in lots of ways, and it's certainly what we're hearing too, is that there is a scenario where Boris does become the kind of kingmaker here, that he comes back and he anoints a sort of candidate to carry on the baton for him. That way he doesn't really have to get his hands dirty. It's not a particularly great time to become Prime Minister with all the economic news around. There's going to be obviously quite a brutal general election in 2 years. I think even the polling, the most favourable polling for Boris Johnson suggests he's not going to win against the Labour Party, even if he did return to Downing Streets. And as we know, Boris Johnson likes to be a winner. He doesn't want to be a loser. So that will be something that will be weighing heavily on his mind. But at the same time, there's a lot of rancour between the two of them. We know from speaking to allies of Boris Johnson, he feels very bitter about what happens, and he very much blames Rishi Sunak for having brought down his government. There's been some talk amongst friends and allies that he's kind of had a realisation, this is Boris Johnson, that perhaps Sunak wasn't quite as deceitful as he'd originally thought. But, I mean, they seem to be a long way off what one described as kind of a kiss and make up scenario. But this really has to happen today because they've only got until Monday in order to determine who's going to be on that ballot paper. And, of course, if they're unable to come to an agreement, then does Boris Johnson then pivot to Penny Mordaunt?
Well, I mean,
or does he stand himself?
Well, I mean, let's talk about Penny Mordaunt for a minute. So seeing her on TV last week, filling in for Liz Truss when Liz Truss was hiding under a desk, or allegedly not, whatever. Look, she's she's a good speaker. She's competent. She performs well in the House. She seems no worse at all this stuff than, frankly, the rest of them. And yet, Tory MPs don't really seem that into her. What's the problem there? What's the thing with Penny Mordaunt that they don't like?
I think it's just that she's gone under the radar, really. There hasn't really been much known about Penny. She hasn't done, other than the defence job, which she did very briefly, she hasn't done a big job in government before. I think that she hasn't necessarily set out a very clear path and set of policies. I mean, we kind of know who Rishi Sunak is. We know what he stands for. You know, he seems to have been vindicated because although he led what we were talking about at the time, was quite a negative campaign, telling people that we were going to have to wait for the tax cuts and basically, you know, we were going to have to be very conservative with the economy.
It has aged well. Yeah,
it has aged well.
Yeah.
You know, so he does kind of have that kind of reputation of being at least economically credible and reliable. And I think that, you know, Penny Mordaunt at the moment is seen as a kind of untested, unknown entity, really, which can be a good thing because, you know, in a contest like this, there are going to be people who very definitely know what they don't want. They don't want Boris Johnson or they don't want Rishi Sunak. So there is an opportunity, you know, that Penny could come up through the middle there. But I think it very definitely comes down to whether Boris stands or not, and where his votes go if he doesn't.
If he doesn't stand, will in the membership? Is there any chance? I mean, can Sunak beat anyone when he goes to the membership?
No, I don't think so.
Right.
I mean, I only go back to what we saw when, I mean, gosh, it feels like a lifetime ago. And probably if we look back, it was only about 8 weeks ago.
If that, yeah.
That we were talking about Penny Mordaunt becoming the next Prime Minister. And at the time, the polling amongst the membership was that she was head and shoulders above any other candidate in the race amongst the membership. So, I mean, it is possible. I mean, what we don't know is if the membership have had a fundamental shift in their viewpoint since the last leadership contest and now have taken on board some of the lessons of the kind of Trussonomics disaster and are now thinking more clearly about who might be a kind of credible leader in a time of economic crisis. But at the same time, they may just still hold the same prejudices they held before, which was that they blamed Rishi Sunak for Boris Johnson's defenestration, and therefore they will vote for anybody but Rishi Sunak. So I don't think it's a given that Rishi Sunak would win among the membership against either candidate, actually.
Look, before I let you go, the main sort of stance of the Labour Party now, indeed everyone else right now, is to call for a general election. Is there any prospect of that happening before it's meant to happen?
Well, I have just interviewed the leader of the Labour Party this morning on this very issue, and you can read that in the Sunday Times tomorrow. I think whilst they would acknowledge that there is huge pressure for a general election at the moment, I think there's also a kind of understanding that that's not where the Conservative Party is at the moment. I mean, it's possible that Boris Johnson, if he did stand and was elected, might think, the way to get around all this is to hold an election now. Then I get a new mandate, although he may not because he may well lose the Labour Party. And this would be one of the ways to make the Privileges Committee go away. However, I think, you know, we're 2 years away from a general election. If they, you know, even more than 2 years away from a general election, if we go all the way to 2025. And I think there's a sense that things can only get better. They're in such a terrible position in the polls at the moment. There is a sense, and there's certainly been some forecasting, that the inflationary pressures that we're suffering at the moment and the cost of living crisis will start to turn around towards the end of next year. So they could be going into a slightly better economic cycle, which is certainly, you know, helpful to a Conservative government, particularly if we've had you know, a period of such great instability, that it could all be all right for them. So I think there will still be a sense that they will want to hold on for as long as they possibly can. If not for anything else, they'll want to try and mitigate the number of seats that they're going to lose.
Nothing